Okay, Chumo, greetings, Yedase. We thank you once again for joining in with us. For those who are unaware, I am Odwirafo Kwesi Radnehmbata Akan. Odwirafo of Akwamu Mind Amarukati Vimudi Akwamu Nation in North America within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people in the Western Hemisphere within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So, hold on one second. All right. So just want to go over this topic. Of course, it's coming up right now. We've touched on this before in different broadcasts and different, things that we put forward, published. But we just want to give a basic foundational, analysis, a brief analysis of SOPDET or SOPDET, which is the divinity, misnomered Sirius or Sothis, but that's the divinity whose shrine is the brightest star in the sky. And also you have Auset, who possesses SOPDET. So she's called Auset SOPDET when she's operating in harmony with Alsar, when he's possessing the constellation Sa, which is misnomered Orion. So in their stellar aspect, when Alsar and Auset are functioning together as forces in nature, and they use these stellar shrines to transmit their spiritual energy to Earth, she possesses the star system SOPDET, so-called Sirius. She's called Auset SOPDET, misnomered Isis Sirius or Isis Sothis, but Auset SOPDET, and he is called Alsar Sa, misnomered Osiris Orion, but it's really Alsar Sa. So that is who the divinity is, but that's divinity itself is SOPDET or SOPDET, and she governs that brightest star in the sky, that shrine that, illuminates our solar system. So, but of course, when we talk about our culture, ancestral culture, and spirituality and so forth, the whites and offspring seek to invade and corrupt ancestral religious practices, trying to co-opt certain things, but also corrupting things and manufacturing practices and rituals that never existed and have no basis in reality at all. The Lion's Gate is a totally fraudulent, fallacious practice that has no basis in ancient Kemet or any ancient culture anywhere. So let's look into it. And this won't take long. So if you look at the notion of the Lion's Gate, and let's look real quickly at what some of them would have to say about the Lion's Gate. Just pull up a random article about the Lion's Gate. And the issue with regard to this, not only is it, false, fraudulent, but it becomes even more egregious when Black people embrace this misinformation and then try to tie it to our ancient ancestral practices. And then try to tie Kemet and our ancestral, practices to it and trying to legitimize it. So let me pull up this article real quick. All right, just give me a second. I want to make sure I can. All right, there it is. Okay, so one of, many articles talking about the Lion's Gate, portal, 8-8, ancient origins, portal openers, and the key to manifestation. So, it says Sirius, a portal to spiritual wisdom. Sirius is the brightest star in our skies and has played an important role in spiritual traditions throughout the world. And Sirius is the key to opening the Lion's Gate portal. 100% false. Sirius is the brightest star visible. That's true, of course, in the Earth's night sky and has been revered by various civilizations throughout history. Modern mystics will often refer to Sirius as the great central sun, a luminous portal to divine wisdom. Not accurate either. They talk about the name Sirius and so forth, and the corruption of the term Sirius, glowing scorcher, all of that. Now, they say in ancient Egypt, Sirius was deified as the goddess SOPDET, Septet, and appears as a woman with a 5-point star on her head. SOPDET or Septet is said to be a form of the goddess Set. There are actually two different divinities. SOPDET's consort was the god Sa, who deified the constellation Orion, as we said earlier. Just as SOPDET is associated with Isis or Set, Sa was associated with her consort Osiris or Osar. Now, but as we said earlier, the male divinity Sa is a deity whose shrine is the constellation Orion, so-called Orion, but it's called Sa, or Sahu Kemet. Septet is a female force in creation that animates the star system, so-called Sirius and Sothis, but Septet. And Set and Osar will possess those star systems, just like a spirit can possess a human being, one of us, and operate through our bodies and so forth. They also possess planets, sun, moon, stars, and so forth. But we'll get into that. Now, they say during the Lionsgate portal, the Earth, Sirius, the constellation Orion, and our sun in the sign of Leo, the Lion, all come into alignment. Totally false. In New Thought spiritual communities, this cosmic event is said to activate a celestial portal that allows our manifestations to take form more quickly. It's a time of collective evolution and an invitation to focus your intentions, connect with the spirit, and bring your desires to life. Though the energy of the Lion's Gate lasts around 2 weeks, it's said to peak on August 8th, 8/8. And next summer will be quite potent as 8/8/8. And they talk about 2024 being an 8, which is not actually, bringing in the numerological blessings of this day. 8 is a potent number associated with power, sex, and money, as well as death and rebirth and all of this. So that gives you a basic breakdown of what most sites will say. Now, what actually happens is when you look at the history or the origins or the true story of this, prior to the 1990s, you won't find any mention of any Lionsgate portal, anything. This is something that was manufactured in the 90s by pseudo New Age white, quote unquote spiritualists. And we can find and pinpoint one of the major articles back in the 90s, probably the source article, but around that time when they put forth this false information. And let's go to that article now. And even Europeans started debunking the Lionsgate for their own people at a certain point. So, hold on 1 second. I had this document up. And of course, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat room, and we can get to that. Okay, so I'm gonna have to get that article back up. I had it up earlier. Let me see. Okay. So this is the site where you find this original article. You're not going to find an article older than this one, going into detail about the quote unquote Lionsgate portal and so forth. And even though they posted it April 1st, 1999, they were talking about 1998. So it was written prior to that. So let's just look at a little bit of what they have to say. And you'll see the origins of this fake observance. Now, the Summer of Unconditional Love, decoding the Hall of Records, keys under the Sphinx. Summer of the Prophecies. The summer months of 1998 offer a unique spiritual opportunity. It is unlike any that has been offered to humanity on the earth until now. Between 1998 and the year 2012, the earth will be shifting into its next stage of planetary evolution. The whole of humanity will be shifting along with the earth. Of course, that's total nonsense. Whether individual humans will be conscious of what is happening during the next 13 to 14 years is still an open question, and so forth. So they say all that. Then we get to the crux of it. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, spoke suggestively of 1998 being the year when the Hall of Records hidden beneath the Sphinx in Egypt would be rediscovered and opened. Let's show a quick little image of show a quick little image of Edgar Cayce. So a pseudo spiritualist within the white population. Our people should not be foolishly following the misinformation of this individual or anybody outside of our culture and so forth. But this is what this is based upon. So, but let's go back. This is Edgar Cayce. You can read about Edgar Cayce, popular amongst the whites and their offspring. Now, so Edgar Cayce, the quote-unquote sleeping prophet, spoke suggestively of 1998. That was being the year when the Hall of Records hidden beneath the Sphinx in Egypt would be rediscovered and opened. This quote-unquote opening in 1998 was also associated with the imminent second coming of Christ. Of course, Christ is a fictional cartoon character who never existed of any race whatsoever. But this is what they were teaching. The records were supposedly, quote unquote, sealed around 10,500 BCE. This was during the astrological age of Leo the Lion. In recent years, the connection between the constellation of the Lion in the sky and the Sphinx on Earth has become rather popular, as above, so below. Then they start talking about what is a pole shift, really, and so forth. And they talk about pole shifts and so forth. But we don't have to go through all of that. So here's the part. Between the paws of the Sphinx, just after the lunar eclipse on August 8th, 1998. So the year 1998 is based on Edgar Cayce saying that the records are going to be open. Of course, there are no records under the paws of the Sphinx and all of that in 1998, but he was saying that the records will be open and the history of all of humanity is open and the second coming of Christ is going to happen in 1998. So 1998 was key for them. Just after the lunar eclipse on August 8th, 1998. So that's 8/8/98. And for them, that's why they solidified the date. It was a lunar eclipse, number one, so it was August 8th. And then that lunar eclipse took place during the year that their fake sleeping prophet said the Hall of Records, ancient Hall of Records would be open. So the sun, just after the lunar eclipse on August 8th, 98, the sun moves into the constellation of the Lion. On August 21st through the 22nd, a solar eclipse takes place immediately in front of the star Regulus, the Lion's heart. This corresponds to the doorway between the paws of the Sphinx. Edgar Cayce cryptically spoke, "The line of shadow falls between the paws of the Sphinx," while referring to the entrance to the Hall of Records. During this eclipse, a shadow will cover the sun between the paws of the Lion Sphinx. And then they say what is unique and special about this particular solar eclipse is that it occurs near the time of galactic alignment. The last galactic alignment, when an equinox aligned with this galactic pole, was just prior to the last age of the Lion. And the sealing of the Hall of Records, the true history of humanity is supposedly contained amongst these records. maybe the only time that we can reconnect with our true ancestors. This is a cracker talking now, who are probably intergalactic travelers. Of course, they were into the foolishness of extraterrestrialism, is during a galactic alignment. And then they started talking more about the Sphinx and, the Hall of Records and so forth. Now, so it's a couple of points. There's no Hall of Records, that was buried, that had the history of humanity and discovered in 1998. That never happened. Of course, Christ is a fictional cartoon character. There's no such thing as Christ consciousness. We've proven that in our book, Kukutuntum, The Ancestral Jurisdiction, showing that there was no black Jesus, white Jesus, none, period. When they talk about 8898, so they got the year from Edgar Cayce. Did anything happen in 98? Of course, it did. There was a lunar eclipse in 98. So first they got the year and they were looking forward to this year. Then a lunar eclipse took place and they said, oh, the lunar eclipse happened on 8/8 in 98. So the prophecy is being fulfilled by the sleeping prophet. Then a couple of weeks later, there was a solar eclipse and they tried to say it had something to do with the lion and so forth. But the key was, when we're talking about 8/8/98, this is where they get the information from. Now, let me jump back. Okay, so there's a reason why we utilize this in the flyer for the show. We show the actual calendar of ancient Kemet. This is an image of the divinity SOPDET and so forth. So because because it said Lionsgate, then people began to run around and look for any lion divinity in ancient Kemet, and any lion divinity they began to associate it with that, and they started saying Sekhmet has something to do with it, or the Akeru lions and so forth. Total nonsense. But let's go to the calendar of Kemet. So they said 8/8/98. Did anything happen there? No. So, in fact, before we get to the calendar, people after a while debunking this whole story. There was no galactic alignment. Yes, about 13,000 years ago, the equinoctial point was, at the beginning of the constellation of Heru Imaket, or Herakuti, which is so-called, Leo and so forth, which is the Shesep and Ankh, so-called Sphinx, but it's the Shesep and Ankh and so forth. But that lasts for a certain period. We will not be back in that period until another 13,000 years. When we talk about it's 13,024 right now, that goes back to the beginning of the Septepi and the beginning of that particular period, which they've read about that, so they tried to incorporate that in their fallacy. But the beginning of that equinoctial, cycle, or astrological, quote unquote, cycle of Heru Imaket, the beginning of the misnomer, the lion, going back about 13,000 years ago, that's when it, happens. But that only takes place every 26,000 years. So once it goes through that cycle, it won't come back around another 26,000 years. That was 13,000 years ago. We won't be at that point until another 13,000 years from now. There's no galactic alignment taking place on August 8th. So they started debunking this because they saw what was happening. People were running with this date because they said 8/8/98, and they tried to make that something numerological and spiritual and so forth. And then people began to monetize it. Lectures, Lionsgate readings, Lionsgate retreats, Lionsgate movies, Lionsgate documentaries. When people started getting on YouTube and, monetizing their channels on YouTube, and they're doing videos about the Lionsgate and all these different things, they're making thousands of dollars a month talking about this, and people are tuning in and so forth. And they're just monetizing something that's totally fraudulent, has no basis in reality. So some people started debunking it. Sometimes they're just some atheists and so forth, but they started debunking it. They were like, actually, That's not true. There was nothing happening in 1998. There was no opening of any Hall of Records and so forth. None of this took place, and there's nothing special about August 8th. There's no portal opening astrologically or otherwise on August 8th. So then when they debunked it and the people wanted to continue to monetize and promote this myth, their next step was to say, well, actually, it's really not necessarily about that, what we initially said about the, solar eclipse and so forth. It really goes back to ancient times, and it goes back to the star Sirius and the heliacal rising of Sirius. And the heliacal rising of Sirius happens on August 8th, and that's the brightest star in the sky, and that's when the star, that's the beginning of the year. In Kemet, the agricultural year, is the Waprin Pet, or the opening of the year and so forth, the heliacal rising of Sirius. And therefore, since that happened on August 8th, that's what the real Lionsgate is. And then you start getting all of this documentation that kind of, went past and left behind what he was saying about Edgar Cayce. You don't see anybody talking about that now on these Lionsgate, websites. They kind of left that original article alone because it got debunked, and they started pushing this narrative that is really talking about the ancient opening of the year in ancient Kemet that happened on August 8th, the heliacal rising of the star Sirius. And like that article we read at first, when they talked about, SOPDET and Sirius, and they started trying to sound, very intellectual and as though they were studying Egyptology and so forth, they started putting forward that narrative. Here's the problem. In the early or the late 90s and the early 2000s and so forth, if those who were around at that time, I first got on the internet in the late 90s, and we're looking at this kind of information, there wasn't hardly any information at all posted on the internet. Now there are millions of pages talking about ancient Kemet and various divinities, and people taking videos and going inside temples and primary sources and all of this stuff. But back then, you could rarely find anything substantive about ancient Kemet. And I remember looking back then in the late 90s and early so-called 2000s, we knew about the heliacal rising of SOPDET or Sirius. I was putting out our Kuku Tuntun, the ancestral jurisdiction. I was doing my own research, getting things from primary sources. But when you're looking for the primary source material and so forth, you didn't find a lot of that back then. There were sites back then who were saying that the heliacal rising of Sirius took place on August 4th. If you looked in, in ancient Kemet, in the region of Egypt today, they would say August 4th. Some were saying August 6th. Some were saying August 8th is when the heliacal rising of Sirius took place, in Egypt. And there were many sites saying that, and then people started copying that. And that was they felt like they struck gold. They were like, okay, it wasn't this lunar eclipse that took place on August 8th, 1998, that Edgar Cayce was talking about and trying to, tie that to a quote unquote galactic alignment. Actually, the Lionsgate portal is August 8th because that's when the star Sirius rises. And some websites were saying that because they hadn't done the research. Now let's look at the real information. And this is why it's important, of course, for you to, check your sources when people are putting out all these different, theories and so forth. Investigate it. Don't embrace anything that anybody puts forward unless they can prove it. Why would you embrace it first and then, wait for somebody to prove it to you? Why don't you prove it to yourself? So if they had done some real research back in the late 90s, early so-called 2000s, they would have never put this forth. The people who were sincere, talking about in our community, they wouldn't have put this forward. But they wouldn't have embraced it and ran with it. But a lot of our people will just embrace whatever the whites and offspring say and then build their lives around it. So let's look at the heliacal rising of Sirius. These sites that dealt with astronomy, and you can even deal with the U.S. naval observation to get the precise down to the second when different stars rise and so forth and manifest. So if you look at the Sirius heliacal rising, when the star system, SOPDET or Sirius rises, just before the sun and so forth, you can get a calculator and find out anywhere on Earth when the, star rises. So let's expand that a little bit. So you see that here. And we'll just go down to the calculator real quick. Heliacal rising dates. These are selected dates for Northern Hemisphere latitudes. You see it can go from 10%, 10 degrees north latitude, July 17th. 60 degrees north, like near Alaska, September 2nd. So just looking at that range itself, from 10 degrees north to 60 degrees north, the heliacal rising of Sirius can happen anywhere from July 17th to September 2nd. So what is that? What is that saying? What is it telling us? Just like if you know that the sun rises, like today, the sun rose today in Washington, D.C. at 6:10 a.m. If you look at the time of sunrise in Cincinnati, Ohio today, it was 6:40 a.m., both Eastern Standard Time. And the further west you go, the later it's going to be. Depending on where you are within the lines of longitude, that determines, when your quote unquote sunrise is taking place. Depending on where you are, the Northern Hemisphere alone, from the equator all the way up to, the North Pole and so forth, depending on the line of latitude or the region you are, that determines the heliacal rising of Sirius in your area. So, as you can see, the heliacal rising of Sirius doesn't, quote unquote, take place on August 8th. That's never been an accurate supposition. Depending on where you live, it, is based on that. So what happened was, when that information came out, we're talking about the late 90s, early so-called 2000s, when people didn't have a lot of information. And because of that, a lot of pseudo researchers are running amok within the internet streets because nobody's checking what they're saying. And a lot of people who are pseudo spiritualists, they just want to embrace anything that feels good anyway. So if it sounds good, they embrace it, then they run with it and they post it on their website. And then somebody else takes that and posts it on theirs and becomes viral and so forth. And then people run with this, and it's a brand new narrative. At some point, they got caught. They got exposed. People put this information out. Depending on where you are in the latitude, lines of latitude, it can go from anywhere from July all the way to September. So it's foolish to say that the heliacal rising of Sirius takes place on August 8th. Because they were busted, because they were caught, they changed the narrative. They didn't want to just say, well, we were wrong. They're monetizing this. They're writing books. They're creating documentaries. They're having, tarot readings and retreats and shamanistic, ceremonies and giving people mushrooms and all of that to open up their portals and consciousness, quote unquote, for the Lion's Gate so they can manifest total fraud. But they didn't want to explain that. So they created a new narrative. They started saying, well, actually, the Lion's Gate is not August 8th, technically. It begins in July. That's when the portal opens. And then it reaches its peak on August 8th. And then it begins to dwindle. So there's a window in between where you can, take advantage of this energy. But it opens in July and then it, peaks and then it begins to, close in August. When they found out about these charts, that's when they changed the narrative. And now you hear people, even some of our people, repeating this foolishness. Oh, well, the portal actually opens in July, and that's when the manifestation begins, but it peaks on August 8th. They didn't want to let go of the August 8th date. Why not? August 8th was the original lie because it really had to do with the lunar eclipse that took place on August 8th, 1998. But more importantly, to sell the lie, they had to put forth the fake numerology. Originally 8898. But then after 98, it was just 8, and they were like 88 Lionsgate, and that was the big thing. Ooh, 8 manifestation and all this other stuff. So they had to hold on to 88. They couldn't say 87 or 86 or 84 because that wasn't sexy enough. They had to have 88. So of course they're going to say it peaks on 88. Of course, there's no peak on 88 at all. So let's get into 88 because some of our people will embrace that and say, well, it's the 8th month of the year and the 8th day of the month and so forth. And this is what 8 represents. And it deals with this kind of energetic signature and so forth. Yet some of those same people who are trying to tie this to ancient Kemet will say, well, Europeans say the year starts at January 1st, and actually the year starts at spring in March, and we shouldn't go along with the European year. We should go along with our traditional year. Every year around January, the same people who are saying that, which is accurate to the extent that, of course, the new year doesn't begin in the middle of winter on January 1st. That's a caveman new year. Everything is dark. Everything is cold. Everything is dead. They come out in the middle of the night in the ice and say Happy New Year. Only cave dwellers would say that's a New Year time to celebrate. But for us, it's either the conception time, the harvest time, which is the fall, autumn equinox, time to harvest, but also the seeding time or conception time. And then some people observe, of course, the spring equinox when things begin to sprout and are brand new and so forth. These are the 2 balancing points of the year and so forth. So some of our people who are embracing this fallacy were also saying, well, we don't celebrate the new year in January. We celebrate at the spring equinox. Well, if you celebrate the new year at the spring equinox, then August is not the 8th month. And then, of course, it's not the 8th day. So you can't have it both ways. You can't talk about 88 numerologically, and even their numerological, definitions are misinformed as well. And we did a whole course on Nkane ancestral numerology rooted in our ancestral culture against what is put forth by the whites and offspring and their false narratives associated with the numbers. We talk about these numbers associated with specific deities that the whites and offspring can't communicate with, they have no knowledge of, so they put forward misinformation about the nature of these different numbers. So their numerological definitions are off, but even the time frame is off. August is not the 8th month, and August 8th, that's not the 8th day. So let's look at an actual calendar, a real calendar. If you're talking about ancient Kemet and trying to tie this to, the rise of SOPDET or Sirius, then you can't call it 88 if you're talking about ancient Kemet, because ancient Kemet we have our own calendar. So why are you looking at a Gregorian calendar date, trying to associate that with, an ancient ceremony in ancient Kemet associated with the rise of the star SOPDET? So what is our ancient calendar? So you see that, piece right there. Let's go. And by the way, since you see this, just to put a finer point on this, you can see the different lines of latitude. So 60 degrees is up there where like Alaska is. You see 41 degrees, for example, Chicago. So in Chicago on August 12th is when the heliacal rising of Sirius would take place if you're living in Chicago. What about where the Sheseppenak is? What about on the Giza Plateau where the Meru, the Great Pyramid is, the Great Meru is, and where the Sheseppenak is? What is the line of latitude for the Giza Plateau? That would be important, since they're trying to associate this with ancient Kemet. So as you can see, the latitude is 30 degrees north and longitude is 31 degrees east, but the line of latitude is 30 degrees north. Now, if we look on our chart for the northern hemisphere, let's just go back. As you can see, 30 degrees north is August 1st. So on the Giza Plateau, where the Shesep and Ankh is, the so-called Sphinx, August 8th is not when the heliacal rising of SOPDET or Sirius takes place. It's at 30 degrees north latitude. It takes place on August 1st. So even that date is inaccurate. They didn't understand that because back in the year 99 or so-called 2000, 2001, 2, 3, and so forth, there's a dearth of information on the internet about this and that. These were just pseudo researchers. So if it didn't show up on the internet or somebody put some misinformation out on the internet, they didn't go further to research. They weren't going to the U.S. Naval Laboratory to make sure to see exactly, the rising and setting of these stars and so forth. They get some information or they massage it a little bit to make it fit their narrative and put it forward. On the Giza Plateau, August 1st. So that knocks 8/8 out the way in the context of that time of the year and that specific day. Now let's look at the pseudo numerology of that. And normally we shouldn't have to go through this to, explain this information to our people, but we need to understand that we need to stop embracing trends that are put forward by our enemies that we try to incorporate as part of our culture. This is how we lost knowledge of our culture, by allowing the enemy to invade, corrupt the culture, and repackage it and give it back to us in a corrupted, perverse form that bears no resemblance in reality to real culture. So let's look at it. Two different pictures of the ancient Kemetic calendar, which is preserved today as the Coptic calendar. So let's look. That's one picture. Here's another image as well. So Coptic is the late period dialect of the language of Kemet that came into use about 2,000 years ago at the end of the dynastic period. It's a dialectical variant. So just like in Akan, you have the name of a female born on Friday is Afua amongst the Asante. It's Efua amongst the Fanti. A female born on Wednesday is Akua amongst the Asante. It's Ekua amongst the Fanti. You have Awura and Ewuraba and so forth. So you have different dialectical variants to shift between I and A and so forth, different things. The same thing with the language of ancient Kemet. And we can compare the ancient dialect from, 5,000 years ago, the way it was written, compared to the dialect that came into usage about 2,000 years ago, the late period dialect, the Coptic dialect, and so forth. So this is what Coptic means. The last, portion of the culture when we were still in control and so forth, before the end of the dynastic period, before the Europeans invaded and took over, we were still speaking that late period dialect, the Coptic dialect, and the calendar was preserved, and the Coptic calendar is still a preservation of that ancient Kemetic calendar. So this is why you see in this chart, you see the different dialects, the Bohairic Coptic dialect, the Sahidic Coptic dialect, then the transliteration of Coptic, and then the Arabic, pronunciation. Then they, compare it to the Ethiopian calendar, which is very similar. But, the Kemetic calendar as used today, the Coptic calendar is a, preservation of that ancient calendar. So they would show the dates as they manifest in the Gregorian calendar dates according to, the original dates. So the calendar begins the first month of the year. In the Gregorian calendar, the first month of the year is January. And then, January 1st is the, first day of the year. And the month, of course, is January after the Roman fake deity Janus and so forth. In ancient Kemet, the first day of, or the first month of the year is the month governed by the deity Tahuti. So not January 1, it's Tahuti 1. And Tahuti 1, and in the civil calendar in Kemet, there were 12 months of 30 days each. And then there's an intercalary period of 5 days, the 5 days over the year and so forth. So 12 months time plus 30 days times 30 days each is 360 days, plus the miniature month of 5 days. That makes it 365 and so forth. So that's the civil calendar in ancient Kemet. And that's what this calendar is, the survival of that calendar. So the first month is 30 days. It's not January. It's called Tahuti after the deity Tahuti. And you'll see here that in Coptic, Tahuti became Tahut and Taut. And in Greek, it became Thoth and Thoth and Thoth and so forth, which is a corruption. But so what you'll see here is that in the Gregorian calendar, that's September 11th. In our calendar, the first day of the first month, Tahuti 1, is September 11th. So when we get to September 11th next month, that in Kemet, those who practice, still use the traditional calendar, they're going to be saying Happy New Year because that's the first day of the first month. And the Ethiopian calendar, depending on, which group in Ethiopia, they have either September 10th or September 11th for their New Year's Day. So that's the New Year's Day. That is, that's the first day of the first month. Now, that being the case, the second month, Paupi, begins October 11th. The third month, dedicated to the divinity Het Heru, begins that's the third month. Het Heru 1 is November 10th in the Gregorian calendar. The fourth month is Kaher Ka, and you'll see the ancient names here. So Tahuti, Pat and Apet, Het Heru, Kaher Ka, and you go all the way down the list. When you get down to the 12th month of the year, in Coptic is Mesori. In ancient Kemet, that's Mesut Ra, meaning the birth of Ra. That's Mesori or Mesut Ra. That's the 12th month. And then the first day of the 12th month in the Gregorian calendar date is August 7th. That's 12th month, the month of Mesura, 12, and the first day is equivalent to August 7th in the Gregorian calendar. That means August 8th is the second day of the 12th month, the second day of Mesura. So there's no 8-8. It's not the 8th month. So when August 7th hits next week, that is not the 8th month of a real year. August 8th, next week, that is not the 8th month of our real year, and it is not the 8th day of the real year. The month is fraudulent, and the day is fraudulent and false. And the year itself, of course, it's not 2024 because Jesus never existed, so nothing happened 2024 years ago. So the month is wrong, the day is wrong, the year is wrong. So when people say this is 8-8 and it's opening up a portal, it's not 8-8 at all. Totally 100% fraudulent. Now, and this is just another example with the actual name spelled in the Midutu here and so forth, but Tohuti or Tohut, once again, September 11th, the first day, second day, first month, second month, third month, fourth month, and so forth, same thing. And this Pert Sapatit, or the coming forth of Sapatit and so forth. That's taking place. Actually, let me switch over real quick. So the Pert Sapatit, or the coming forth of Sapatit, the coming forth of that star, as this festival is called and so forth. Once again, just to reiterate that August 1st is the, when it happens on the Giza Plateau, and it doesn't happen on August 8th. So, and once again, of course, this does not represent, from July to September, it doesn't represent anything opening and then a peak and then closing. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't, just like there's no difference between the sunrise at 6:10 a.m. in Washington, D.C., but it doesn't rise until 6:40 p.m. in, Cincinnati. That's not about an opening and closing and a span of when the energy is coming. That's because you're on a different place within Earth. And if you're living in Kemet, just like if you were living somewhere, like living in Chicago, it doesn't matter what's happening in Alaska or in Pensacola, Florida. When that star rises at a certain time and it affects the Earth and affects you and so forth, that's when it's happening. So it's not some notion of, the energy opens up in July and then it begins to close in late August and so forth. Again, they had to accommodate the fact that they misinformed people. They realized that depending on where you live on Earth, that's when the star, the helical rising took place. So they tried to account for that by including the entire northern hemisphere within their scheme, which is nonsensical. All right. Let's give one more piece of information. We did a course a while back, and it's, it still is one of the courses that we have in archive that you can access. And the name of the course is named after this article that we published at Chinebois, which means Sacred Animal Totems, Original Zodiac Signs in Kemet. And we show you the actual divinities and their sacred animal totems. So the great ram divinity Banebjedet, which they actually corrupted into Baphomet and so forth, which is nonsense once again. But this is a sacred ram divinity. It's corrupted into Aries. And then you have Ptah Min, which is the bull. You have Shu and Tefnut, the male and female twins. Kepra, which was corrupted into Cancer. Heru Bedeti, Heru Herakuti, Heru Imaket, and so forth. So-called Leo. Auset is the Virgin, of course. Ma'at, Libra, Balance. Sereket, the female divinity. Scorpion, that's a sacred animal totem. You also have Setchima, Sekhmet, which they call Ophiuchus, the 13th sign of the zodiac, but she's the serpent bearer, which they would say that's Asclepius, but that's not accurate. She is the patron divinity of healing, as well as, a warrioress. And in late period, they had Ptah, Sekhmet, and not the divinity Nefertim as the tribe, but Ptah, Sekhmet, and Imhotep. And Imhotep was corrupted into Asclepius by the Greeks, making him a Greek healer and so forth, but it was really the great black, healer and scientist Imhotep. Neat, the archeress is Sagittarius. Kunwimu, the great ram of the south, is Capricorn, and they corrupted him into a goat, just like they corrupted the great ram of the north, Banebjedet, Aries. They corrupted him later into the goat of Mendes, but the great ram of the south, Kunwimu, they corrupted into Capricorn or a seahorse and so forth. And then you have the male and female divinity Hapi and Merit of the Nile River that they call Aquarius. They only focus on the male divinity, Hapi. the divinity, the water divinity, and they call him Aquarius. It's really Hapi, the divinity of the Nile River. But Merit is the female divinity of the Nile River. And we also have Anit and Remy, the fish divinities, the two fish who are the pilot fish of the boat of Ra. And that's where you get Pisces from. So we go through all of that and we show those different divinities, but we also show when the sun, the Aten, moves into position into these constellations in real time. And there are 13 constellations that cross the ecliptic now. Previously, because of the precession of the equinoxes, there were 12 constellations, but now there are 13, which includes Sechima Sekhmet, which the Whites and Offspring call Ophiuchus, and we give the actual dates. And we're talking about that in the article and so forth, but the actual dates. And you see that there are different. One of them lasts for 45 days. One of the months lasts for 7 days. One is 32 days, and so forth. They're not all 30 days each. So when you look at the time that the sun enters the constellation of Heru Emaket, it actually enters the constellation on August 10th. So what does that mean? That means you look up in the sky on August 8th, the sun has not entered the constellation of Heru Emaket, so-called Leo. You have to wait until August 10th for that to take place. They took the 30-day, 12-month, 30-day, piece with regard to a calendar from the civil calendar of Kemet, 12 months of 30 days, each one governed by a divinity and so forth, and then 5 intercalary days, the 5 days over the year and so forth. The Whites and Offspring took that, they corrupted that, and then they put forward a calendar where there was 12, months of 30 days each, plus a leap year and so forth. And then they, associated specific dates with the constellations, and they froze everything in time at, 30 days apiece and so forth. And that's never been accurate. If you look up in the sky on August 8th, the solar disk is not in the constellation of quote unquote Leo. So that's not accurate. If you look at the heliacal rising of Sirius in the region of where the Shesepenoch is, at the time of the heliacal rising, it's August 1st. So, and then of course, even the notion of the numerology of 8-8 is totally inaccurate as well. So everything they have to say from top to bottom, inside and out about 8-8 is totally fraudulent. Moreover, and most importantly, when we look at a divinity like SOPDET, and let's just bring that image back right quick. So this is SOPDET, the spiritual force that animates the brightest star in the sky. And then, as we said, Aset and SOPDET work together in the context of spirit possession. So in the Hoodoo tradition, when spirit possession takes place and so forth, and the deity is operating through the body of the person, as we always say, is spirit possession is no different than, if you're driving a car and you stop and you let your friend get in the car and they get in the driver's seat and you get in the back seat. Now there are two entities in the vessel, but that person is controlling the direction of the vessel. And then after a while, they get out the car and you get back in the front seat. Now it's one person inside the vessel. And your physical body is the vessel. When an ancestral spirit or a deity possesses one of the Abosom, one of the Orisha, one of the Vodou, one of the Ntoru, and so forth, and the spirit takes up residence in your body through spirit possession, then your spirit takes the background and that spirit takes the foreground and moves through your body, heals, touches, communicates with people and so forth, lays hands to heal people, picks herbs, curates medicine and shows you how to do that and so forth, points out which herbs are associated with which divinities and which minerals are associated with which divinities. So when the spirit leaves, you have that information. So in the same fashion, just like they can possess us, because we as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people, we are the human totems for the divinities. We carry their energy complexes, their energetic signatures. You also have plant totems. Certain plants are fiery plants like ginger. Certain plants are watery plants. Some are more earthy and so forth. Energetic signatures different. Different plants are connected to fire deities, water deities, earth divinities, atmospheric divinities. You have animal totems. Some animals are fiery animals like lions and so forth. Some are cool like a dove and so forth. So there are animals that are associated with the energy complex of a divinity. There are plants that are associated with the specific energy signature of divinities. There are minerals that are associated with specific signatures of deities. And then there are us, human beings, specifically and only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black human beings. We are, depending on our energy complex, we're children of different divinities. If someone says they're a child of the divinity Awusi in Akan, or Benna in Akan, or Abinna, or Afia, and so forth, that's the divinity that governs our spiritual head. In the Yoruba tradition, when someone says their head is governed by Oshun or Obatala or Ogun or Yemaja and so forth, you know what they're talking about, is the divinity that governs them, and they carry that energetic signature themselves. The same thing with plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life. The same is true when the divinities, when we talk about mineral life, not just the minerals inside of Earth, but the planets, sun, moon, and stars are mineral life as well. So Aset will possess, the star system, SOPDET. Now Aset is operating within that star system and using that star system to transmit her spiritual energy. Just like Asar will possess the constellation Sahu or Orion, utilize that constellation to project his spiritual energy in cycles, of course. So when we talk about SOPDET, we're talking about a divinity that we pour libation to, who communicates with us, who possesses no different than Oshun and Ogun or Awusi and Amma and Afia and Akua and so forth. These are forces in nature that we have a direct spirit genetic relationship to as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. They possess our people, communicate with our people, teach us how to heal and everything else. We pour libation to SOPDET and Sa on a daily basis. When they need to communicate, they do. And they have their own names in every Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit language. Depending on the language, they have names based on that language, but it's the same force in creation. So, for example, Sa is called Inyenkrenten in Akan, and so forth. So, now, let's go back to this article. When you're talking about SOPDET, and you're talking about constellations and so forth, let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, so we had talked about the divinities Sekhmet as the 13th sign of the zodiac, but there was a portion where we focused on what's really taking place. We talk about what is termed the zodiac, the signs of the zodiac, and its implications for our people has been misinterpreted by the whites and their offspring trustorically and cosmologically. We talk about the divinities, forces in nature, the ancestral shrines, and so forth. But hold on 1 second. Yaboson, which is the Akan term for deities, divine spirit forces in creation. Hold on 1 second. I want to make sure you're seeing this. Okay. So in this article, we say, Yaboson, Akan for deities, divine spirit forces animating creation, utilize the various features of creation as shrines. Shrines magnify the energy of the Yaboson, Odorisha, Vodu, Arusi, Ntoru, Ntorutu, and so forth. We always use the example of one can magnify use a magnifying glass to concentrate energy. So if you take a magnifying glass, if the sun is shining on some dry leaves on the ground, they're just warm. If you take a magnifying glass and place it in a specific angle, the sun will shine through the glass. It will become concentrated to a point, and then it can cause the leaves to combust. The output of solar energy is not changed, but you simply concentrated it through a device and magnified it at a specific point. Ancestral shrines, when you see us build ancestral shrines or shrines for divinities in our homes or sacred spaces like Abosom Fie, shrines of deities and so forth, we establish these shrines and we have certain sculptures and so forth that are ritually prepared. We invite the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou to come down and take up a residence temporarily in that shrine space within that sculpture and so forth, so we can communicate through them. No different than you have a cell phone and so forth. When it's connected, then you can use that device to communicate through. If there's no connection, you just have a piece of plastic with some circuitry and so forth, and nothing's happening. But when we invoke the Abosom or evoke the Nsamanfo, the ancestral spirit deities and ancestral spirits, they'll take up a residence in these ritually prepared spaces and figures and communicate with us directly. The shrine magnifies the energy of the Abosom at that space. That's the reason we establish a shrine. No different than a magnifying glass. You can communicate with the forces in nature anywhere in the world because we're connected to them spirit genetically by blood. Just like you can feel the solar energy. You can walk around all over the city and the sun is shining on you. You can feel it wherever you are. But if you want to concentrate it in a specific point, particularize it, and magnify its power so it becomes very intense, so you can take advantage of that intense expression of that solar energy, you can do so with a device. And we do the same thing with the shrine. At Nkombre, we magnify the power of the force in nature in that space, or the ancestral spirit in that space, and take advantage of that dispensation of energy in that space during that ritual time. The same thing happens with regard to planets, sun, moon, stars. These are the original shrines of the spirits that animate creation. Their spirits invest themselves in planets, sun, moon, stars, and then when they invest themselves there, on Earth, they invest themselves in the oceans, rivers, mountains, atmosphere, core of Earth, inner core, outer core, mantle, lower mantle, upper mantle, and so forth, different features of Earth. But before that, they just the Earth itself and the other planets as well, and the stars as well. So when we're saying here, we give that example of magnification. They possess the shrine. This is no different than the Abosom. Hold on a second. So this is the information we're saying right there. We say the body of the priest or priestess during spirit possession becomes a shrine, wherein the divinity takes up temporary residence to communicate directly in the physical realm with the community. The energy of the Abosom radiating through the body shrine of the person, as well as through the shrine erected in the home or shrine house, is magnified to a degree where combustion is affected, and the people can thereby experience the power and force of divinity when possession occurs at an optimal level. And then we talked about the plant totems and so forth, but the stars and constellations are shrines as well. Now, we say that we are assigned to different divinities pre-incarnation as ancestral spirits sent into the womb. We're already governed by specific divinities. We say because of this reality, we are sent into the womb and ushered via birth by our ancestral spirits in Samanfo to be born under the governance of a specific phase of the moon, cycle of the sun, certain planetary body and constellation as an indication of who we were aligned with pre-incarnation. The Abosom, the deities who govern these specific phases, cycle, and celestial bodies. When the Abosom deity possess certain constellations of stars, the constellations radiate their unique expression of energy. The constellation is a major shrine, magnifying that energy and so forth. Now, Our functioning under the governance of a particular abosom deity, pre-incarnation and after birth, allows those who are able to communicate with this abosom ritually to learn of the nature of our spiritual disposition, our function in creation, and so forth. We say the key here is direct communication with the abosom, which all of the whites in our offspring are incapable of without exception. Now, we talk about how they are shown as achinebois, they're sacred animal totems. Foundation is spirit possession and direct knowledge of reincarnation and all of its implications, including the assignment of people and clans to certain abosom pre-incarnation. So what we're saying in that article, with a divinity like SOPDET, also called, SOPDET and so forth. When we talk about, the signs and so forth and how the signs affect people, when we talk about, for example, Gemini and Shu and Tefnut, there are people who are children of the divinity Shu, divinity Tefnut. Those deities possess our people, communicate directly with us. Bademjedet, so-called Aries, that's a sacred animal totem, the ram for that specific divinity. We communicate with Bademjedet. If you look at Setchima, Sekhmet, or you look at Aset, quote unquote, the virgin, misnomered Virgo, Aset is a force in creation. She's called Odua in Yoruba. She's Ajua, as well as Essi and Akan and so forth. She's the great mother, Minona in the Vodun tradition. She's a spiritual force that governs people that we communicate with. We're not just reading signs and feeling some little nudge of energy that pushes us in one direction or the other. So when we're talking about constellations and signs and divinities and animal totems, first and foremost, if you can't communicate with the deity who takes up residence in that constellation and dispenses this energy to us, if you can't communicate with them, then you really don't know what that sign is about. You just think it's a sign. You just think it's a certain time of the year. If you're talking about, the bull, or you're talking about, the Heru Imaket, who is actually Benna in the Akan tradition, Ogun in the Yoruba tradition. If you cannot communicate with Ogun, because if you're not black, only Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people, can communicate with and possess these divinities. If you can't communicate with Ogun, who we call Benna and Akan, and he's called Ogu in Yoruba and Heru Bedeti in ancient Kemet. If you can't communicate with him, you don't know anything about the sign, quote unquote, of Leo, because you can't communicate with the divinity who governs that force in creation. That aspect of creation you can't communicate, so you have no real knowledge of that. Just like you can feel some energy from the sun and become hot and so forth, but that doesn't mean you have knowledge of the sun. The difference between the whites and our offspring is like us standing, under the light of the full day sun and becoming brown and empowered and so forth, and someone standing inside of a shed that's covered with no windows. They're going to feel heat because the sun is beating down on that shed, but they have no direct sunlight. And the whites and our offspring, non-black individuals, they don't have a direct connection to the forces in nature. They can feel some electromagnetic energy moving around, but they can't be possessed by nor communicate with the forces in nature. That includes the actual deities whose animal totems are used for the signs of the quote-unquote zodiac. But the key is, who are the divinities? And they can't communicate with that. So they have no knowledge of that. And that includes this notion of a quote-unquote lion's gate. It has nothing to do with Sekhmet or Setchima, which is a different time of the year, as a matter of fact. They only threw her name in there because they tried to associate it first with the Shesepenank, the Sphinx, and the lion. And then when they found out that had nothing to do with August 8th, but they still wanted to use Lion's Gate, they started looking for all the different lion and lioness divinities and Kemet and trying to associate them with that piece. So that's the information we wanted to share. We just wanted to put forward reality. So if you want to deal with a real calendar, if you're talking about ancient Kemet, if you're talking about ancient civilizations and what our ancient civilizations did and how we operated and so forth, and what time of the year was, optimal for certain expressions of energy. Okay, we'll look at our ancient calendar. and quote unquote August 8th, or that time frame within the Gregorian calendar, that is not a portal in our real calendar, and it never has been. So look at our actual calendars. The calendar is different, by the way, in Kemet than it would be the way it impacts us in the Western Hemisphere. It's different in Kemet because they lived on a floodplain, different than, say, West Afuraitkaitnit if you're living in a forest area. This is why we had a different kind of calendar. Even next to Kemet in Khanit or Kanat, which is, Libya, the Khanland and so forth, as well as south of Kemet in Khanit, Nubia. So you have the southern Khan people, the southern Nubians, the western Khan people, the western Nubians. They had a different calendar structure because they weren't living on the floodplain. It was important when SOPDET rose, at the beginning, quote unquote, of the agricultural cycle in Kemet, because it didn't rain in Kemet. It hardly ever rained. So when the star rose, then the flood waters would come, then the land would be flooded for a number of months. And then afterwards, the water would recede. The black silt was deposited on the banks of the river. Then people can go out and plant their crops, and you knew abundance was coming. So they had to wait for the river to flood. And when the star moved in position, the brightest star in the sky, then they knew that the flood was coming, and that was a time for celebration because their entire economy and their livelihood and capacity to live was dependent on the river beginning to swell. And once they saw the star move into position, they would say the divine teardrop of Aset would fall from the star SOPDET and fall in the river and cause it to swell. And it was time for a celebration because it was the death, but also the precursor to the resurrection of Asar. Because when the waters would recede, then the resurrection would happen, and they would show Asar with green skin and so forth, dealing with renewal and resurrection. And that was the time of the, sprouting and everything else. But when that star would rise, that was the beginning of the agricultural cycle, the swelling of the river. It was a celebration and so forth. But that was for living on the floodplain when it didn't rain. For us in the Western Hemisphere, where there are equinoxes and solstices, and there's a stark difference between the summertime and the winter, where it's snow and so forth, and the spring and fall and so forth, we're more focused on the solstices and equinoxes and the shifts between those 4 13-week cycles. Same thing in West Afuraitkaitnit and Central and South. They have their own calendars that fit their way of life and the way energy manifests in those regions of the Earth Mother. So even in that context, it doesn't even make sense to try to create a whole celebration around the heliacal rising of SOPDET or Sirius in the Western Hemisphere, because that was based with regard to celebration on the economy and the agricultural cycle of people living in Kemet on the floodplain and what happened at that time. Now, every day of the year is sacred for us. There are different divinities that govern different aspects, of the, cycles and so forth. We've done courses on that. But there's nothing significant about the Gregorian calendar date of 8/8. Never has been, never will be. So. Okay. So any questions, if you want to post something in the chat room, if you have any questions on any of that. And let me show you this as well. So we not only do we, need to debunk things like this, but we also, put forward information that, empowers us. So we have a number of courses that we have taught. We have 40 online courses. For those of you who are unaware, I published 31 books. All 31 books you can download for free from my website on odwirafo.com at any time. Released 2 documentary films. We just released one back in October, Hoodoo, Akan Ancestral Religion in North America. You can access that free right here on the YouTube site. You'll see on the documentary film section, we have 2 documentary films. You can watch the Hoodoo film for free. And then we also have our first film on ancestral divination. You can purchase that for $11.11. But we also have our new course starting once again. We're teaching this course again, starting this Monday, August 5th. The SUSUW, which is the ancient term for meditation. It's a meditation instructor certification. So it's a 4-week online course, and you can become certified as a meditation or SUSUW instructor, and with the certification that allows you to go to schools or places of business or organizations, cultural or human services organizations, to conduct SUSUW or meditation sessions. And people bring people out. They typically, pay people $100, $200, $300 for you to conduct like a 30-minute session with youth or adults. Many schools are incorporating this to assist their students to, focus, enhance learning outcomes. Many businesses have seminars where they'll have someone come out and open up with meditation to help enhance work productivity and reduce anxiety and stress. Many human services organizations have people come out, once a week or once a month to assist their clients if they have group therapy or if they're in a women's shelter or whatever it is, and they assist them with reducing anxiety, reducing stress, overcoming addictions, basic focus, a number of different things, helping with weight loss, a number of different things. So it has many different applications. So once you become certified, you can utilize that certification and, utilize that as an entrepreneurial endeavor. Some people do it part-time. Some people make it full-time. They'll have a school on Monday, a human services organization on Tuesday, another school on Wednesday, a business on Thursday, and they go once, a week to these different places, conduct their sessions, get paid for that, and make it a full-time endeavor. So our new 4-week course begins this Monday. We just completed a 4-week course on Wednesday, and those people received their certifications. We're starting the new one for August 5th through August 26th. It's once a week, every Monday for 4 weeks. The books are included with the registration fee. And we also have a referral fee. So if you'd like to refer someone to our course, once they register, then we'll give you $100 for referring that person to us. So you can see that the SUSUW Meditation Instructor Certification course there. Okay. So any questions on any of that before we log off? We just wanted to put that information out there so people can understand. We need to investigate things before we jump on any kind of bandwagon, because you end up not only misinforming people, but you also, you end up, supporting people's misendeavors. They're putting out information just to generate revenue off of false information. And again, documentaries, books, retreats, readings, Lionsgate packages and Lionsgate oils and everything else. And there's no such thing as a Lionsgate at all. Never been. They don't know who SOPDET is or SOPDET is because they can't communicate with that divinity. Our people can, and we can align with her throughout the course of the year, but they can't. So they have no knowledge of who she is and what her function in creation is. So we don't want to support anything that's misinformed, self-destructive, draining resources from people when we could be and should be and are building up our own people, our own organizations, our own institutions, educational, cultural, spiritual, economic, political, social, and so forth. So let's move forward. And anytime you receive any information, investigate first, prove it first before you embrace anything. So, okay, so Yedase, we thank everybody for joining in with us. And Yabesha Bio, we will meet again. That's it.